Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on, everybody? Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? My father was a freedom fighter and I'm his freedom son. I'm gonna stay right here and fight for freedom until this battle is won. Everybody, which side are you on, boy? Which side are you?
I guess the first thing I want to do is start by saying good morning to each and every one of you.
Good morning.
Indeed, an honor to be here, to be a part of this workshop. And so I'd like to definitely thank Jackson State University, Montgomery Institute, and all individuals who had a hand in providing me with an opportunity to be here and to share my work. And so I'm looking forward to doing that. Now, this is going to be somewhat interactive, and I'll talk a little bit what I want to do. I've titled this session, Organizing the Work of NAACP in Mississippi, Medgar Wiley Evers as Field Secretary and Servant Leader. And I've titled that because there is a whole lot about this particular individual that is extremely important. I may not be able to get to it all. Well, I'm not going to say I may not be. I can't get to it all. But I definitely want individuals to leave this session having a stronger understanding of who Evers was, those things that defined his life, his childhood, those things that made him who he was. Because that's going to be extremely important for our understanding what type of activist he was, and more importantly then, what type of NAACP field secretary he was. That's going to be extremely important. And so I'm going to break this up into at least 3 sections. The first, I'll talk about his background, those important things in his life, his upbringing, and how those things translated into him becoming who he was, particularly the environment of Mississippi. I'll also talk about his work with the NAACP, how he saw the NAACP, what that organization meant to him in terms of social and political struggle. And then finally, I'll also talk about sort of toward the end of his life, the conflicts that he had with the NAACP, particularly as it related to strategy. And so those are some of the things that I'm going to try to get to today. Now, having put all of that out there, I'm going to do things a little bit differently. I like to kind of move around, and so I'm going to do that. I also like talking, and I'm pretty sure my voice is clear. Hopefully, can you all hear me?
Yes.
All right, good. So, there's a couple of things I like to do. First of all,
I know. I thought you wanted to walk in here and say,
okay. Good to see you. Yeah, so I'm going to walk around. There's a couple of things that I would like to do here. I got a couple of video clips I'll show as well as it goes on into the lecture too. But when I'm talking to people, because I get a sense that this is kind of this inclusive kind of group.
You're right.
Okay. And so as I'm talking to and presenting this information, please feel free to interject, ask a question. It's going to be interactive. I'll ask things of you as well. Before I can effectively do that, and I'll probably do a lot of this. I got material here, but I'll probably do a lot of it from here. Before I do that, of course, I need to know who it is that I'm talking to.
Yeah.
You all kind of got an introduction of myself, so what I'm going to do is walk around and ask the individual their name. Even if I know who you are, I still want you to tell us all so we can kind of get this family atmosphere. I also will shake each individual's hand as a means of welcoming you not only to Mississippi, this program, but also welcoming you to this place, this space, this time, and your desire to share with you yourself with me as I present this information. So is that okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, let's start here.
Huntington Taylor, Westchester University.
Wonderful, wonderful. Good to see you. Yes, sir.
That's the world McLeod from Walls, which is smaller than that.
Yes. You thrown up there like L.A.
University of Tennessee.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Like that.
Sarah Simons, New York University.
Wonderful, wonderful. Nice to see you.
Beverly, St. Louis State University.
Wonderful, nice to see you.
And Kemper, Mississippi University.
Wonderful, wonderful. Nice to have you here.
Robert Tinkler, Chico, California.
Wonderful, nice to have you.
Jolie Sheffer, Bowling Green State University.
Wonderful, nice to
Sophomore to college.
Yes, you are.
The University of Maryland chapter.
Wonderful, nice to have you here.
Rhonda Gaines, I'm at Miami Ohio University.
Wonderful, nice to have you here.
Rebecca Buchanan, and I'm at Western Carolina University.
Wonderful, nice to have you here.
Kevin Leonard from Western Washington University.
Wonderful, nice to have you here.
Tobin Miller-Shear, University of Montana.
Wonderful, nice to have you here.
Steve Haynes,
Okay.
Rhodes College.
My name is Marlon Moore from the University of North Carolina.
Hi, Javette Ward, University of Alaska Anchorage.
Mayor from Moravian College, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
Barry Lee, Atlanta, Georgia, Morehouse College, by way of Illinois, Mississippi, the Big I.
Oh.
Greg Bruce, University.
Man, I see people back here on the outside too.
Yeah.
I leave nobody down. Yes, ma'am.
Anita Dorsey, Word.
Wonderful, wonderful, nice to have you here. Word?
Word.
Word.
Hillary's mom.
Rico Jackson. All right, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Nice to have you all here. Nice to have you. Wonderful, okay. Now for some will come. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. A couple of things I want to do. First of all, is to begin with a few questions of what we talked about. So key questions for consideration discussion. First of all, what did it mean to be an activist in 1950s to 1960s Mississippi? What do you think that meant? If you call yourself an activist and you were active in Mississippi during this period, what did that mean?
Constantly in danger.
All right, constantly in danger, brave, what else? Committed, definitely. Anybody else? Scared. Dedicated, what was that?
Scared.
Fear. Yeah, definitely that.
You have a vision for an alternate reality.
Definitely, okay, a vision for an alternate reality. That reality being?
Freedom, lack of racism.
Equal rights.
Definitely, definitely, definitely. Yes, sir.
I was going to say, deep believer.
Yes. Definitely, definitely. Okay.
Fighter for social justice.
Definitely, and it's a lot that comes under that.
That's right. That's right. There comes up.
All right, so what sacrifices had to be made, and what did it take to make it? All right, you've got all these things that you talk about. What sacrifices had to be made then?
Might alienate your family.
Time, alienate your family in what way?
Families may not want you to be involved because they're afraid of losing jobs or afraid of violence.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Think about what that means. If you're going to go out and challenge the system, because that's what you're doing. If you're going to challenge the system, you know not only are you putting yourself in danger,
Putting your family.
but you're also putting your family in danger as well. I heard someone also say sacrifice time. Yes, many times these individuals are out in the field spending very little time with their family, but they're looking at the larger picture. Yes. So what did it take then to make these sacrifices? Again, it goes back to what you all said earlier, this idea of dedication and commitment. This notion of seeing something better. This may not be for me. I may not see these changes, but maybe my children will see them. Maybe my children's children will see them. That's a long view of the movement, and it's a lot that comes with that. Then who all suffered in the struggle for equality, and how do you recognize their sacrifices? How do you assign value to social struggle and sacrifice? All right. We look back today, but how do you do that? Who suffered then? Who all suffered? Some of the things you talked about, the individual in many cases, the family in particular. Just think about that for a minute, because I want us today to kind of put ourselves in their shoes. Now, I have two daughters, 12 and 16. I get up, I go to work, I do the things that I do, but I cannot imagine that if I got up one morning and told them goodbye, that I might not be coming home that evening. I know that, and I accept it. It's a lot to that. Or I know that I lay my head down at night and my home may be firebombed, killing everybody in there. I know that and I accept it because I'm looking for the longer view. When we're looking back at history, it's not enough just to know the dates and the facts and the figures and the people. We also have to, as much as we can, put ourselves in their positions to see what it meant when we call themselves activists. So how do you assign value to social struggle and sacrifice? How do we think we assign value to it?
Ways in which people are remembered.
becomes an important part of that too. You know? How we act, what we do, how people are remembered. So then that gets to the final question. What responsibilities do we have today to carry on the legacy of those who gave their time, heart, soul, and sometimes their lives to make this world a better place for those living in the present, and most importantly, those coming in the future, because the struggles are not over.
Right.
So, what responsibilities do we have now?
You're obligated.
That's, yeah.
You're obligated.
Obligated.
Obligated. You're obligated.
Yeah, vote.
To be committed to.
Yeah, she says vote. You have to be committed.
Stand tall because of them shoulders of people.
That's a key thing too. Standing tall because others came prior to you. There's a level of responsibility that comes with that. So when we start talking about, and there's people in this room who understand, who sacrificed, who've done these things, who've gone through this kind of fight. And so when we start talking about that, it's important that we understand what that really means and what that entails. And this isn't just history lessons of way back, but the very same things that they fought for then are some of the very same issues that are prevalent today.
Amen.
Which means that we have to give the enterprise more than lip service. Lip service is not sufficient.
It is not. If anything,
Anybody can talk.
oh, yeah, yeah, pretty much. Some people real good. Yeah. But it's not what you say, but it's what you do. Because that's where it takes. That's the story. Yes.
Well, one of the points that I'm getting in regards to that is that many of us get into our own little circles and think that we're going to influence our scope and sequence without organization, without mobilizing support. And I've been there for a long time. I mean, you know, for a while anyway. And what I'm seeing now, the importance of mobilization and getting people together. As we talked yesterday, and I'm going to make this quick, I'm sorry, but I had some debriefing last night. We talked yesterday about the Montgomery bus boycott. What was significant about that is that they organized. They called in their support, every bit of support. So what I'm realizing for myself, and I'm sorry I'm going through this now, but I need people around me. I want to get out there and do stuff. And the other thing that I had, and I want to say it please, is that as I've done the other stuff that I thought was working in my little scope and sequence to try to initiate change, that same resistance that we have on the bigger picture has also been in place. And it's bigger than me because it's systematic. So now I've got to get some folks on my side.
Okay. All right, that's important. When you bring up Montgomery, it was an old woman
Yes.
who was walking. And when they pulled up to offer her a ride, she said, that's okay. She was old. They said, we can give you a ride.
41 years old.
Say it again.
Not old.
Say what?
41 years
No,
old. That's not
this
old.
one, no, she's twice there.
Oh,
No. I'm not talking about Rose Park. I'm talking about after the Montgomery bus. Y'all help me now. I'm talking about another supporter of the movement. She's probably 70, 80 years old. But she was walking, and they pulled up there, carpooled, and they tried to give her a ride. And she says, no, I don't want a ride because I'm walking for my grandchildren. That goes back to what you're talking about with this notion of everybody getting involved, everybody sacrificing. And that old lady said, I can't get in this car because I'm walking for my grandchildren. So that's the kind of things that we're talking about. These are the things that we'll see with people like Evers. So having said that then, Mississippi, the Magnolia State. All right. Welcome to Mississippi. It's like coming home. All right? Now, this is a sign here. All right? But now, the reality of that depends upon what kind of home you were coming to or existing in. Because in 1950s, 1960s, for African Americans, this was the reality of what the society was like. Mississippi had a lot of visual social demarcation lines. This is just one of those. So, now, there were individuals who were outside of the state, who looked and understood what Mississippi was like in terms of its abject oppression and violence. They wrote about it, they spoke about it, they highlighted it. Medgar Evers being very instrumental and publicizing the problems that were going on in the state. One of those individuals was Langston Hughes, who wrote his poem in response to the lynching of Emmett Till. The poem says, "Oh, what sorrow, oh, what pity, oh, what pain, that tears and blood should mix like rain, and terror come again to Mississippi." Come again. Where's Terror been? On vacation? Up north? In some other section of the nation, lying low, unpublicized, masked, with only jaundiced eyes showing through the mask. Oh, what sorrow, pity, pain, that tears and blood should mix like rain in Mississippi, and terror fed it hot, yet claiming cold, remain. Powerful poem. So Mississippi had a reputation for extreme violence and oppression in its attempt to control African Americans. Evers become extremely important in putting that out. Now, Medgar Evers was born on July 2nd, 1925, to these two individuals, James and Jess Evers. Evers lived in a quiet part of Newton County, Mississippi, and the family got along pretty well with both blacks and whites in the community. But it's going to be these two individuals that's going to be extremely important in terms of how Evers grows up and what he thinks and believes is important. His father, James Evers, would be instrumental in that. Evers was a man who strongly believed that it was a man's duty to fend for himself, to take care of his family, and not to put up with any kind of threats or attacks upon one's manhood. He taught Evers the responsibility he had to the larger community, but he also taught him not to be scared of anybody or anything at any time. His mother, Jessie Evers, taught him what it meant to be a human being and what your responsibilities were. She was a person who took care of the community, would cook for anybody, no matter what time it was, or who they were. At one point, and I do a little cooking. A little cooking. But at one point, a stranger knocked on the door and told her that he was hungry and that people had told him if he came to this house, he would be fed. She got up and cooked him a meal. What time was it? 2 a.m. If you're a child living in that household, that tells you you have a responsibility to the welfare of those who you meet. It tells you that you have a larger responsibility to the larger society. And you have a father who's telling you, you've got to be self-sufficient, you've got to stand up, you cannot back down, you've got to be a man. That's important if you are a black child, a black male in Mississippi in the 1920s and the 1930s. To see your father say that. Like you say, anybody can talk. Evers showed his father. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So these are the two parents that he has. But there's also the power of lynching, because the state of Mississippi at this point understands that it has to have complete control of the black population if it wants to maintain its quote-unquote superiority. Between 1882 and 1968, 539 African Americans were lynched in Mississippi towns. What does that mean? When we say lynched, what does that mean?
Cruel death.
All right, definitely cruel death. What else?
Racial terror.
Definitely racial terror. It was designed to terrorize people.
Denial of humanity.
Yes. This notion of denial of humanity. We'll also get to that too.
Impunity.
Say it again?
Impunity.
Yes. All right? So all these things are part of that African Americans are living with and dealing with. So when you start to say that, look, I'm no longer going to put up with the way things are, that's saying a lot. This quote by our black Mississippi. To kill a Negro was nothing. It was like killing a chicken or a snake. The whites would say, niggas just supposed to die. Ain't no damn good anyway, so just go on and kill them. This is the environment that Evers and others are working through. Now, in terms of visuals, because we talk about these things, but also the next couple of slides are somewhat disturbing. I always throw that out there, but when we're talking about it, we also have to understand what these things look like. two black men lynched in Winona, Mississippi in 1937. Robert Blue Jack McDaniel and Roosevelt Towns lynched in Duck Hill in 1937. These are the images that individuals see. And this goes, Mississippi was rough in 1950s, 1960s. Someone said impunity a few minutes ago, but a person could be killed for little or nothing. Just think about that. Individual walking down the sidewalk doesn't get off quick enough. Could either be a severe beating or a killing. There's reports of individuals who are lynched because they owed somebody 50 cents.
Oh, whistle at a white woman.
Yes, that's a victim.
There you go. There you go.
Whistled at a white woman or was accused of whistling at a white woman.
Exactly. Same difference.
Yeah, same thing. At the end, things like this is possible.
There you go.
So when we talk about, this is the environment. Remember, Medgar Evers was born in 1925. This is 1937. This thing will happen. Now, this lynching is a real possibility. Now, how does this work? It comes home as well with the lynching of Mr. Willie Tingle. Now, who was Tingle? Tingle was a friend of James Evers. He had children who Medgar Evers played with, who came to the house. And one day, a mob grabbed Tingle, drug him through the streets of Decatur, down to the fairgrounds where they lynched him publicly, shooting him multiple times. And when Medgar and his brother Charles asked their father, well, why did they lynch Mr. Tingle? The only thing their father would say was, just because he's colored son. And that he had been accused of insulting a white woman or whistling at a white woman or something of that nature. But now, imagine if you are a black person, a black child in Mississippi, and you're told that person you know had been lynched because he was colored. Now, how do you think that impacts you? Because you can't change that. So when we start talking about the environment that Evers grew up in, remember who his father was. Remember the lessons his mother brought him. This idea of not having fear, this idea of working for the community, this idea of caring for the community. To see somebody you know get lynched, it was problematic. Now, Evers spoke about this, and he says, nothing was said in public. No sermons in church, no news, no protests. It was as though this man just dissolved except for the bloody clothes. Which, by the way, we'll see. Evers acknowledged that everyone, quote, in town knew of it, never word in public. They left those clothes on a fence for about a year. Every Negro in town was supposed to get the message from those clothes, and I can see those clothes now in my mind's eye. Evers is grown when he's talking about this. When he gives this quote in 1958. What does that tell us then? If he's talking about this as a grown man, what does that then tell us? Definitely memory. Traumatic. What else? Definitely imprinted on the conscience because, guess what? 1958, people still get them. So there's this personal connection then that this has got to stop. And it's my role, based upon my upbringing, that I've got to do everything in my power to stop it. When we talk about activism, you all said it. I asked you all questions. You said throughout activism like commitment, dedication, sacrifice. I didn't say I agree with it. I didn't say it. You all said it. So that's what we're talking about here. When you have a person like this who remembers these things and is willing to sacrifice his life, that's what we're talking about when we say activism. And Medgar Evers is going to be far from alone.
I don't mean to disturb Professor Williams, but one of the things is my grandmother and Medgar Evers were born the same year. She was born in my parents' room. And one of the things that my grandmother's earliest memories is when they were downtown, and Newton don't have a town, but you know what that means. But what happens is that they were downtown.
I'm not going to leave that alone.
And one of her my great-grandmother, Florence McCune, Townsend McCune. And she went to move, and my grandmother, her mother had her hands in her hand. She said she could feel the tightening of her hand, but she said the only thing that I can remember, Tanya, about that moment was that I was like, why are you doing this to Mama? Out of all people, why Mama? And you know, just to hear that when she said it. And by the way, when my grandmother told me that story, she was 85 years old, and tears came in her eyes. So it was just quick.
You don't forget that old saying. Now this becomes powerful because remember, when this is happening, parents have to explain to their children what happened.
That's right.
If you got kicked in the face, you got called something, you got knocked down, and you didn't get up to kill somebody, you got to explain to your children why you didn't do that.
Yeah.
Why he did that to you. The stuff that people don't forget. And even today, it takes a lot sometimes for individuals to talk about those people. So Evers remembered these things too in 1958. Now, getting back to his father, James Evers. Now, James Evers, who by all intents and purposes was a person who did not play. And whites in Newton and Decatur, they knew he did. They called him Crazy Jim. He wouldn't get off the sidewalk. If people threatened his family, he threatened to kill them. There's plenty instances that Charles and Medgar saw their father standing up and threatening to kill white folks who did something to his family or threatened them. And if you're a little boy and you're seeing your father do that, that does something for you. He's also a person who argues that you've got to be self-sufficient. You cannot depend upon anybody else for your livelihood. Because if you do, if you're depending on me to eat, then yeah, it's only a certain length you're willing to go. Because you know the possibility of starving to death is right around the corner. He said you've got to be self-sufficient. He owns several businesses, but look what he did. There's a soup line in Decatur that caters to people who don't have anything to eat. He tells his family this: if the Evers family got in that soup line, I'd kill every one of you and then kill myself. Talk about commitment. When he said it, they knew he meant it. Now, whites called him Crazy Jim. Whites called him that for a right good reason. If you call a person crazy, that means you don't have to deal with the fact that he's exerting his manhood. And what that means, you just say he's crazy. And if you're crazy, we can excuse that kind of behavior. He also taught children, don't ever let anybody beat you. Anyone ever kicks you, you kick the hell out of him. It's him talking to his family. And this right here becomes extremely important. If you're scared, you can't do nothing. Show a coward some nerve, and you can back them down. Now remember, and he's teaching this not only to his boys, but to his girls as well. His son, Charles Evers, wrote the book, Have No Fear. He said Daddy had none. And when we start looking at Medgar Evers and what he was able to do, you understand too, he had no fear as well. So this is the kind of man and woman who Evers springs forth from. Now, someone said dehumanization earlier. Evers, remember, as a young man, we're going to talk about how these things happen, but as a young man, it had pained him to, and this is a quote, watch the Saturday night sport of white men trying to run down a Negro with their car, or white gangs coming through town to beat up a Negro. These were games. Go to town on a Saturday night, car come barreling across the corner, swerve to hit you, you have to jump out of the way. People thought that was fun. Or you had a group of toughs who would come through the community during that time and simply beat up black folks. That's the reality. When we start talking about civil rights activism, we're talking about the reality, are we not? Doesn't make this stuff easy, but it certainly makes it necessary that we understand what's really going on. So Evers talks about this as problematic. As a young man, 16, 17 years old, seeing that happen, he also said that young children as young as the first grade would walk into school, would have buses swerve over and dust them up.
Oh, yes. Oh, Oh, yeah.
Or if it's raining, hit these mud puddles,
Yes.
splash them.
Mm-hmm.
While he said children hung out of bus windows and yelling vile things.
Mm-hmm.
He said, if you are from Mississippi, this is your introductory course of what this state is like. There also was a game, and I talked to his sister, who she said it was called kicking niggas. When you go through town, and a person will walk up behind you, it doesn't matter if you were with your wife, your girlfriend, your children, or whatever, and kick you in the buttocks as hard as he could. And those individuals oftentimes had to withstand that. Do nothing, say nothing. Now imagine what that would be like.
Brock,
Yes, sir.
just recently, we had an incident in Mississippi a few years ago. You know James Craig Anderson being run over
Yes,
by
I actually knew
white guys on Ellis Avenue.
Yes.
Yes.
And they were playing the same game right here in Jackson. And of course, the guys are arrested in prison now. Only two of them, but it was a group of them.
Yeah.
They played this same game just a few years ago.
And this is when Everett, this stuff was going on when he was 15, 16 years old. So that was motivation for him because he said he don't really think he could take it living in Mississippi with those kinds of conditions. October 7, 1943, he enlisted in the military. When he served April 16, 1946, when he discharged, he earned 2 combat stars, the Good Conduct Medal, and he had a notable record of service. Now, when he comes back after World War II, as did many others, they came back less willing to accept, or at least to put up with, the kinds of oppressions that have been going on. And you got this happening all over. Why? Individuals have went cross-border, fought for democracy, fought for freedoms, pushed back tyrants, and then were expected to come back to Mississippi and go back to the way things were. Did not happen. That's not to say that people wasn't struggling before then. But once they come back from the military, you go to the military, let's be real. There's certain things you learn when you're in the military. If you don't know by now, I'm real. You know, so I said, let's get real. I'm already there. But with certain things you learn in the military. Right? And what is that primary thing that you learn? How to kill. All right, how to shoot. How to kill. Self-defense, all that good stuff, right? Training. Yeah. Discipline. Yes. Now, I could come busting in that door, right? Armed, ready to do something. My busting in it and a Navy SEAL busting in it is two different approaches. And it's all about training. So when these individuals came back, they were trained. And they had been told, you're going overseas to fight a tyrant, a person who's keeping people from having freedoms. And that person, of course, was who? Hitler, if he was in Mississippi, would be classified as a hero. So now individuals overseas where folks are killing people, trained to kill people who are fighting terrorism, and these are white. And so when you come back to Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and all these places, you have the same kinds of oppressions that you just fought against. And you say this makes no sense. Yes, in the name of freedom. And people will tell them overseas, their commanding officers, don't get used to these freedoms over here, because when you go back, you're not going to have it. Wow, my internal Charlie Carr. All right. Yes, okay, so when they came back ready to organize. Now, this is the reason here. Jennifer Brooks, historian, says, fulfilling military duties enhanced African-American veterans' sense of self, of who they were, and where they fit into post-war political life, and putting a premium on the role of men and citizens. As soldiers performing the highest civic duties, the war tended to strengthen the historic connection between male identity and political rights. In other words, you went over there, you were fundamentally important to the victory that was had. All right? And you know this. And then you make that connection between what she says, male identity and political rights. Someone said earlier about this idea of voting. It becomes extremely crucial. Black Mississippians understood that the ballot represented the premier symbol of participatory democracy and thus full citizenship.
When you vote, that says that you are a part of the society. They also understood that without access to the ballot, they cannot affect any real political change, nor put individuals in place that will best serve their interests. People are challenging voter denial all over the country at this point. Historians have been to more notice, 46 and 47 alone, you see this all over the South. Black folks challenging voter denial. That happens also in Decatur, Mississippi, July 2nd, 1946. But Evers, his brothers, and 4 of their friends registered to vote in Decatur. I don't have much problem doing that, but when they go to vote, they're met by a mob of 15 to 20 white men determined to stop them from casting that ballot. The important part of that is that these were white individuals who they knew, had played with, had grown up with. And they were pushing and shoving and trying to vote, and they're trying to stop them. Everyone remember when they walked away, it didn't stop there, but the person got in the car was driving beside him, and he threw his shotgun out the window and was pointing at him, and as they walked, he remembered thinking, I'm just waiting for him to kill me. Doesn't happen, they go back, they're not able to vote either, but Evers remembers this, and this is what he said. The 6 of us gathered at my house, and we walked to the polls, I'll never forget it. Now the Negroes on the streets, and when we got to the courthouse, the clerk said he wanted to talk to us. When we got into his office, some 15 to 20 armed white men surged in behind us. Men I had grown up with, had played with. We split up and went home. Around town, Negroes said we had been whipped, beaten up, and ran out of town. Well, in a way, we were whipped, I guess, but I made up my mind then that it would not be like that again, at least not me. That's when he started planning at that point. Weighing the pros and cons. Calculating every move he made for the maximum result. I want you all to look at this brief clip. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier with Evers. Now this is Evers, he's going to talk about, you see he's going to pull this same discussion in.
Anger and a desire for revenge.
Now, for many of us who've gone overseas, fought for this country, fought for Mississippi, we fought for Alabama, we fought for North Carolina, we fought for Illinois, and we fought for every state in this union. Now, we're going to stay here and see that the thing that the mayor has said become a reality.
All right, now he pulled on what? What is he pulling on when he says that we fought for it? He named all these things.
Talking about his patriotism, his idea of liberty, his war experience.
Yes, all that. He says we fought for Alabama, we fought for Mississippi, we fought for Illinois, we fought for Georgia. We did up now. He named all these places that are. I was finna say something, but anyway, he fought for all these places that was extremely oppressive. And he says, we're going to, because we fought that, he says, basically what he says, because we gave our service, we are deserved of citizenship, and we're going to stay right here until that happens. That's a lot when people hear this. So again, it goes to that voting experience. Now, Evers had left high school early. So 46, he goes to Alcorn. He finished the high school requirements. And this is a picture of sort of Alcorn faculty. If you look at them, you can kind of tell these people really aren't playing with you when they come to get your work done. And I show this to my students. I said, look here. Look at these individuals. What do you notice? That's what I tell them. They say, well, you know, they dressed up. And then some of them say, well, they look kind of serious. I don't believe they look kind of serious. And then I tell them, and when you get in my class, Ms. Words, you'll hear this. But I tell them, do you think this individual right here, or right here, or right here, do you think they're going to accept you when you come in class the day after talking about, well, it was raining, so I didn't make it? Absolutely not. These folks are not playing. And when Evans gets there, this is the kind of ground in which he developed and hones his leadership abilities. He also challenges the teachers there, saying you got to teach more than the text. You got to bring that information to the larger community. So there's some back and forth, because when Evers goes to, he finishes in high school, he gets in college. Remember, Evers is a grown man who done been overseas and fought. And he said, you got to take this message, this information, and you got to put it to something. So there was some tension between him and a lot of these presidents. Now, he played sports. That's him right there, number 31. His brother's on the other end here. He played that. He was in the debate team, choir, did quite a bit. This is him also. I think we've all seen that pose these days. Yeah, but that is him too. But in 51, the year before he graduates, he puts this in the organized yearbook. He's talking to the upcoming students, and I'll read it. He says, the hours nearing when the class should not be a class of 150 units combined, but rather 150 separate units, where each unit will have to take on a much greater responsibility from him or herself to help further the progress of our great and ultra-modern civilization. He concludes then, as the hours pass into obscurity, and as our daily tasks, irrespective of their nature, become more complex, we shall realize the indispensable part that our alma mater has played in our development as individuals. She has provided for us with facilities and fine standards of scholarship that we have used to create knowledge in order to meet the obstacles with a considerable degree of know-how and confidence. In other words, you have received some training here. And now you're expected to go out and solve the problems of your community. Can't just get education for education's sake. You got to do something with it. And that's just as relevant today as it was in 51. Yes. He graduates in 52, and he goes to the Mississippi Delta. Now, what do we know about the Delta? And that's this kind of football shape area right here. But he gets a job with Montgomery Mutual Life Insurance Company, Dr. T.R.M. Howard, Theodore Roosevelt Mason Howard. And this was considered, when they came to recruit at Tougaloo, and graduating seniors know, always graduating time, people come and recruit. If you had a job at Montgomery Mutual, that was considered a good job. And he got the job. Remember his upbringing. But what do we know about the Delta?
I know and I was mentioning to our group yesterday, I am from Mississippi, born and reared, stayed here for 30 years, and I have never visited because as a coastal Negro, that was the worst place on the earth to ever go to. So my family, that was an area that we never went to, ever. So I've never gone to Mississippi until this Friday, and I asked the group, pray for it.
The Delta, you're already right. The Delta at this point is extremely rivers. It's extremely impoverished. Yes. And it's still there, but those who control, at that point, 9% of the land, are quite powerful individuals.
And important white politicians.
Yes. So all that is going on is Evers gets into this environment. Remember where he came from. So when he sees that poverty in the Delta at that level, it blows his mind. But he has a good job. But he felt guilty. As he's selling insurance policies, he said he felt guilty selling insurance policies for people who he knew couldn't afford, but who gave their last dollar. Why? So their parent wouldn't be saddled with the debt of trying to pay for their burial. And he saw himself as perpetuating that kind of oppression. He says, any man with an ounce of pride who works in the Delta soon wants to do something. These are kind of images that he would see. And coming to houses, he would see children with no shoes, dirty, nothing to eat. He oftentimes gave them money of his own. Clothing went off. But these are the things that he saw. And in 58, he says, every time I think about my kids and their innocence, I wonder how whites can make the youngsters suffer. I guess that thought keeps me in NAACP work. When he saw these kinds of things, he would come home oftentimes talking about what he had seen and how impoverished things were and how things have got to change. He would come home bearing that. This is 52, 53. So he has what he calls a good job, but it does not satisfy him. If anything, it oppresses him. Remember where he came from. He can't see that and go home not feeling that he has an obligation to change it. His mama taught him. Council of Negro Leadership, Reverend T.R. Howard, Dr. Howard on the left, those meetings sometimes brought about 10,000 or so people who came to hear and listen to people talk, like Thurgood Marshall. Representative Charles Diggs and others would come and talk, but the Regional Council of Negro Leadership, which Evers is an important part of, is also providing Black Mississippians with an organization designed to challenge the oppression that they face. One of those options was an economic boycott of gas station owners who refused to allow Black people to use their restrooms. Now, we all travel, you all travel to get here. And if you're driving long distances, at some point, you gotta stop. You get a little gas, you get a few snacks, and depending on how long you've been driving, I'm not gonna get into business, but there's other things that we do. Now imagine if you were doing that and you pulled in and they said, I'm sorry, we'll take your money, we'll sell your gas, but if you want to use the bathroom, I suggest across the street, there's some wooded areas, handle your business there. Now today, you all be ready to burn the place down. That was a reality for African Americans during this particular period. And also extended to motels and everything else. Well, in 52, the Regional Council organized this boycott, which Evers was a part of, in which it says, don't buy gas when you can't use the restroom. And later changed, we don't buy gas when we can't use the restroom, but the idea was to challenge it. And Evers is a part of this organization. One of the first systemic boycotts that he is a part of. People get on board with that. There's bumper stickers. And they start seeing these bumper stickers on these old beat-up cars. Now, if you're in the Delta and you got that bumper sticker on your car, that identifies you as somebody who's challenging the system. And I just said how oppressive the Delta was. That could either mean the end of your livelihood, if you're working on these plantations, or a beating, or the end of your life. But here we see a car. It says we don't buy gas when we can't use the restroom, pretty nice car. The important part of this is where this car is from. The tag says Tennessee. Because remember, people are traveling through. Now, what does that mean? Not only is this a movement that's happening in the Delta, but it has movement, it has support outside of the state. And then it's going to play an important part in this as well. After a while, because of the economic loss, gas station owners changed and started building restrooms for their Black customers. Economic boycott. This is 52. We see that again, 55, Montgomery. When you start hitting people in their pockets, they start listening to what you got to say. So this serves, RCNL really serves as a blueprint for Evers in terms of how to organize, but more importantly, how to mobilize people to support you, even when they got the most to lose by doing so. I'll summarize this, but this is probably one of the more important parts that happened, and this was Medgar Evers on the death of his father. He says, I was in the basement of the hospital at Union, Mississippi. That's where Negro patients stayed, at my dad's bedside. He had been hemorrhaging and was sinking fast. I heard a rising murmur of voices, a rush of feet, and there was an ugly crowd outside the building. A nurse called me upstairs and asked me to help. There was a Negro with his leg bandaged. He had been in a fracas with policemen. Someone had shot him in the leg. The whites were like madmen, muttering among themselves about the Negro, peeping to the windows to see if they could spot him. My dad died a short time later, and outside these whites were demonstrating like animals. I've never forgotten that argument. A Negro cannot live here or die here in peace as long as things remain as they are. Now, my grandfather passed away a few years ago. And I was in the hospital, by his bedside, with my mother. And he was coming to the end. The only thing we do is watch the monitors. I know the sign. Watch them. Getting fainter and fainter and fainter. And finally, he went completely. We called the doctors in. They unhooked him. But I cannot imagine being in that emotional state and having people outside chasing somebody. And the nurse knows because of what I do that you need to come from your father's bedside and try to mediate this situation. That's what he says. A Negro cannot live here, die here in peace as long as things remain as they are. Remember where he comes from. And things continue. He does not forgive this. This is one important part that pushes him toward more sustained leadership. What gets him in the NAACP, 1953, he decides at our RCNL meeting that he's going to integrate the University of Mississippi Law School. He puts his application in 54. By September of that year, he finds out that it's been rejected on a technicality, but the NAACP is already looking at him. They're looking at him because, and I get to this, he had already been organizing NAACP chapters. And they let Evers know that if this doesn't work out, there's an opportunity for you to join the NAACP. So Ruby Hurley, who's the NAACP Regional Secretary, once she realizes that it's not going to work out for him, she contacts him and lets him know. He's excited about this opportunity. So much so, once you tell somebody you're going to hire him, and you don't say nothing after that, people want to know what's the process. So he started writing letters. Look, I agree, I hadn't heard anything, what's going on. He kept sending them, and finally they sent him a letter saying, yes, we're going to hire you. November 1954, he gets this letter. He becomes the first permanent field secretary for the NAACP in Mississippi. This is in 54. He's ecstatic with this because now he has a job in which he sees he can be a part of solving the problem rather than a part of perpetuating. There's an important change for him. He then moves to Jackson, Mississippi with his wife and now their son as well. Even though he goes to Jackson, Mississippi, he still works in the Delta. Remember, as field secretary, your responsibility is more than just this paperwork. That's the least of what you have to do. Don't try to deal with that, but since some of the things that they have to do, conducting membership campaigns, confirming brag talks, shaping local programs, interpreting national programs, stimulating committee work, lecturing, demonstrating procedures and tactics, filling speaking engagements, on association working on race problems with graduates and other groups. He takes that on with gusto. In April 1955, he says, we're going to recruit 2,000 new people. You all know, when you get on the job, that first time, you are excited. You ready to go. I tell people that McDonald's is never as clean as when it first hires somebody. After that, people kind of like, oh. But Evers says, I'm going to recruit 2,000 new members. That's our goal. More importantly, though, he arouses national curiosity regarding the treatment of African Americans in Mississippi. Start investigating and documenting crimes and physical brutality against Black Mississippi. As well, this is the important part, emotional scars that come from beatings and rapes and murder. Because when you're murdered, that's it for you, but your family still has to deal with your loss. He reports this to the New York office, who then publicizes it across the country. As a result of what Evers does, there becomes this intense focus on what's going on in Mississippi in terms of its abject violence and brutality. And so Evers is very, very instrumental in that. This idea of investigating. Now, remember, as field secretary, his job is to investigate any brutality that happens. Now, what does that mean? That means if it happens in Winona, he got to go down there. If it happens in Biloxi, he got to go down there. It's 82 counties in Mississippi. When we talk about 55, how much is going on? One man's responsible for investigating all of it and getting that news out. So, organizing chapters, he helped revive as a volunteer. NAACP in Mount Bayou, open office in Cleveland. 55 and 56, he helped Ramsey Moore, who was extremely important. Increased the Cleveland membership to 439. 55, April, he opens up a new NAACP chapter. It took 50 members in order for you to get a charter. He opened this up to 57 new members. May 25th, it increased by 70. He continues to organize NAACP chapters. The NAACP is extremely proud of what he's doing in terms of getting new members at this point. That, of course, fluctuates, but that's his job too, is to organize these chapters, to speak to these chapters, and more importantly, to train individuals to go out and replicate this. So if you got an influence, So alone, he's looking for chapters to come up in other places as well. He's responsible for that, but he also trains people. Now, in terms of how he sees the NAACP, the NAACP him serves as a resource mechanism that can provide protection, financial and legal support to persons willing to stand against oppression. Now, what does that mean? If you are fighting against oppression and you're economically vulnerable, people are using that vulnerability whenever you try to challenge anything. Meaning that if you try to vote, put your name on the roll, they find out about it. If you got a loan, suddenly that loan becomes due in full. All right? Think about that. If you own land, you share property, suddenly you evict. But he saw the NAACP as a person or organization that could challenge that provide financial obligations to individuals. One of those programs was Tri-State Bank. Remember we had talked about that car coming out of Memphis? Tri-State Bank is an African-owned bank in Memphis, Tennessee. And the NAACP, and here's a picture of their opening, but they opened in 46 to $240,000 cap. The NAACP worked with Tri-State Bank so that they would provide loan monies to individuals, farmers in particular in Mississippi, who were being denied loans because of their work with NAACP or because of their challenges. NAACP put $20,000 in of their own money. Tri-State Bank is willing to do that, but they want people to also put money in their savings account so they can expand their own loan program. And this wasn't money that was just given away. You still had to qualify on regular bank terms. Gloucester Current says this is why we did it. We met the propaganda effect of their, meaning the White Citizens Council, announcements, which was to scare Negroes, with the counter-propaganda by announcing a program to build up a financial institution in Memphis, whereby a Negro institution would offer relief to those who constituted good creditors. But Gloucester Current believed that if you start taking money outside of Mississippi, if banks realized that just because they wouldn't give a person a loan didn't solve anything, then they were more willing then to provide loans. But you had it out either way. So Evers worked on this too, in terms of seeing who would be, and he was the point man of all this. In 56, the Committee on Mercy and Aid to Farmers provided money to farmers. Again, the NAACP, through Tri-State Bank, would put the money in there and offer Tri-State Bank, let them know that there's going to be a payment plan, things of that nature. Again, this is for farmers. Farmers couldn't get any more than $1,500, but if you're a farmer, you know you're subjected to the the owner of the land, who oftentimes also owned the store that you got your tools from, and all of that. They pulled that away. This was designed to do that. Again, Evers was responsible for organizing, but more importantly, finding individuals and doing the background. Evers also believed that the NAACP should support individuals too. George Jefferson, which was a building developer in Vicksburg, because he was working with NAACP and others against fighting oppression, they put the economic hammer on him. Was threatening to close down his businesses, and Evers asked the NAACP to loan him $50,000. That goes to the point of what Evers, how he saw the NAACP. Reverend Jesse Crane had a family of 14 in Greenwood, 1962, refused to take his name off the voter roll, got evicted. Evers went down there along with James Farmer of Court, and he says this, quote, "We appreciate freedom fighters." Listen to the words here. Freedom fighters like Reverend Crane and family. And to show our appreciation for his courage for standing up like a man, remember where he came from. The NAACP is happy to present Reverend Crane and his family $100 in an effort to help them to make an adjustment. This is the important part. And there is more where that came from. For those who are willing to stand up for freedom.
He did more too.
Yes. Now sometimes Evers is pushing the envelope because in New York they ain't quite heard what he's saying. He's saying it. But because of what's down, and he gives 100. James Farmer of Core tells Crane Core will also give him $100 as well. So that's $200 for the Crane family. And people who hear that say, wait a minute, NAACP, you know. So remember, all this, y'all see how this tied together in terms of way we also humanizing the association. Evers is very instrumental in that. Because when NAACP gets in Mississippi, there's a lot of people, particularly in the Delta, who see the NAACP as really some trouble to get into. And they're not always sure if the NAACP fully understands the problems that black Mississippians face. Many people say, how can you understand it if you're coming to New York? You're from New York, you're from way out. How do you really get what we got going? Evers is going to be important in that. In many ways, he changes this notion by his willingness. This is important. His willingness to assume the same risk that he's asking other people to take on. And people talk about this time and time again by saying he would never ask you to do something he's not willing to do himself. He's not willing for you to put your family on the line if he's not going to put his on. That means a lot. And you have people like Cornelius Turner, who was also his friend but also worked, who says, if you got a person who's that way, how can you not feel for somebody like that? More importantly, then, he's providing people with money when he can. He's often at their homes, he ate with them, he played with their children. All while explaining to the parents the role that you got. A person who comes to your house and talks to you, understands what you're saying, and plays with your children, who you know, because he's constantly there, and he's telling you, you know, I know it's going to be done. I know somebody probably going to die. But look at that little child out there running the yard. What responsibilities do we have for that child? That was one of the humanizing things he puts a face on the NAACP. And so people then began to ask, how can you not feel something for a person who's willing to do that? Who talks to you, who understands the problems you are, because he's from Mississippi. It's one thing somebody talking about it, but he's from it. And again, we said earlier, anybody can talk. But seeing Evers out there day in and day out means something. And it puts a humanizing face on the NAACP in Mississippi. In terms of his work, the NAACP relied on Evers to investigate instances of abuse, such as investigating police brutality, murders, rapes, voter discrimination, economic sanctions, and a host of other injustices. One of those examples is Paul Ferguson. Paul Ferguson was riding a bus who went through New Albany, Mississippi. It was just a few miles from there. Ferguson,
Sorry, east of that, actually.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, there you go. He's going through New Albany on his way to East St. Louis, Illinois. He asked the driver, how far do we have to go? The driver told him, and Ferguson said, oh, Jesus. You know, it's a long way. The driver didn't like a black person saying that to him in Mississippi and hit him in the head with a ticket punch. Ferguson didn't like being hit by a ticket punch. Jumped on him and beaten the driver before his wife or some other person pulled him off. But when he got off, the driver went straight to the police, who came, picked up Ferguson, and held him while the driver kicked and beat him. Ferguson's wife is there also, who the driver assaults as well. She's pregnant. This is the kicker. While this is going on, Ferguson is dressed in his Air Force uniform. He's jailed, and they're telling him, we don't allow black people to act this way down in Mississippi. So they beat him. He's in jail where he says officers then kicked him and also kicked him in the eye. They pay, Evers goes down, investigate that. They pay his $250 bail. But the ministers in the community tell Evers, I think it's best if you get Ferguson out of here until the trial date. Do not let him stay in this area. Remember, he's got his Air Force uniform on when this happens. This is 55. Evers goes and investigates that. These are the kinds of things that he's doing. He also investigates murders. Reverend George Lee, 1955. Brookhaven, Mississippi. How many bells on it? Reverend George Lee is a minister who advocates that African Americans vote. He's a minister. He's riding around for 6 different churches. But he tells people, look, you gotta vote. You gotta have some place to eat. You gotta do things now. You can't wait till you go to heaven to get your just reserve. You can't wait. People tell him, cut this out. He does it. May 7th, 1955, while he's going home, a car pulls up alongside him, fires shotgun blasts in the car, one of which tears off half his face. He dies moments later. It was investigated that. August 13, 1955, Mr. Lamar Smith, Brookhaven, Mississippi, advocating the African Americans use of absentee ballot. They tell him, stop that. He does it. He takes a meeting at the courthouse on a Saturday, gunned down on the courthouse lawn, in daylight, no witnesses. Now, I don't know how many of you all been at courthouses. I ain't trying to get in your business. But on a Saturday, in the morning, it's plenty of people around. No witnesses. We all know, and those people. August 28th, kidnapped, Money, Mississippi, it will be this image that stirs the movement. This is one of the images that got this Rosa Parks fired up. Evers is instrumental in investigating this as well. December 1955, Clinton Melton, Glendora, Mississippi. Fills up a patron's car, $2 worth of gas. The person comes out and said, I didn't want $2. I didn't want it filled up. I didn't want it filled up. I only wanted this. They get into altercation. The boss tells Melton, look, just go home. Just go home. Before he go home, the person shotguns Melton to death. Again, filling up his car. He says, you told me to. No, I didn't. I said, I wanted $2 for it. Killed her. This is who? This is Melton's wife and his 4 children that he lived. Evers investigates that and says, this tragedy shall be of long memory. So these are the things that Evers is responsible for. He sees day in and day out. And it is fundamentally mind-altering for him. And he sees the NAACP as needing to really get involved with changing this. He's going to push for more direct action. But he also uses position to provide people what they need. Day-to-day basis. NAACP is sending money, $500 for one month, $1,500 for others, but they let him know that, look, you can use some of this money to provide children during Christmas time, toys, food, and we're going to leave it up to you to decide how much money you want to use for that. Again, every pushing the NAACP to satisfy not only just the legal aspects of what people are doing, but their day-to-day needs as well. Then we get to the power of the individual. We'll be rolling. All right, so we get to the power of the individual. These are some of the key individuals too. Faneuil Heyman, Ruleville, Anthony Moore, Cleveland, Mississippi, Bernie Lemon, Hattiesburg, Gladys Noel Bates, Jackson, Mississippi. But that individual is key to all this as well. These are 2 key people, Reverend W.D. Ridgway and Ms. Beatrice Young. Reverend Ridgway from Hattiesburg. Evers, because he's constantly talking to people, he has this connection. And because people believe so much in what he's saying, they're willing to put their lives on the line. And these 2 individuals were willing to go to D.C. and testify before the Senate subcommittee about the brutality that they had incurred and what was going on in Mississippi. They do this, of course, in 57, and Evers talks about, we're not quite sure how much pressure is going to be placed upon them, although we know it's going to be some pressure. Later on, for W.D. Ridgway, Evers writes that shortly after he returned from congressional hearing, even before he returned, open threats had been made on his family, to the extent that the Negroes in the Hattiesburg community guarded the house nightly to prevent any unnatural occurrence until he ever returned. As soon as he was home, an agent from the Commercial Credit Corporation came out to repossess his car. So he was only 3 days overdue with his payments and had previously run 2 or 3 weeks overdue. About a week later, his son-in-law was refused a loan that he had made arrangements to get for a home. The refusal came as a result of Reverend Ridgway's appearance as wife. Beatrice Young also suffered economic threats and things of that nature. Her altercation prior to this with police had resulted in a beating in which she lost her unborn child. So when we talk about what's happening in the 50s and 60s in Mississippi, it's something serious. So when you start saying that you're going to go against this, this is what's going to happen. That that goes to Evers, who says only you can save you. He says the future of the Negro vote is very large in the hands of the Negro citizen and voter. The burden of improvement rests primarily with the Negro himself. Negro citizens must prepare to present themselves in numbers to be qualified, and that preparation is their responsibility. There is no attempt here to underestimate the forces of resistance, the ignorance, trickery, fear, threats, physical assault that have been employed and will continue to be employed. But their eradication will not be accomplished by some miracle out of the sky, some wish for relief from a far place. It will be down primarily through the intelligence, diligence, persistence, and courage of the population presently this rank time. In other words, only you gonna save you.
That's a good quote there.
That's where it's at. And he sees the NAACP as this organization for doing that. Evers, of course, by the 1960s, it's become more and more pushing for more direct action. He then also has conflicts with the NAACP strategies. That begins in early 56. At the NAACP's annual meeting in San Francisco, California, Martin Luther King Jr. was the spokesman. Now we know King making that speech in 56, that Montgomery boycott had been going on. Evers had been following it, had been in Montgomery, had saw it, would believe that this thing could work. And so once he heard King at this annual meeting, he was fired up. So much so that he got a lot of delegates who were at the convention. They met in his room. They handed out a 3-page resolution supporting the Montgomery boycott. And he's doing this on his own. World Business and all of them are there. They don't like the direction this is going. They get wind of it. That they plan to present this at the convention floor the very next day. They meet with King and say, wait a minute, what do you got going? They somehow know they get with Evers now, but in light of development and being pushed, the NAACP reluctantly agreed to support the boycott by way of the legal defense fund, assuming litigation responsibilities associated with the boycott. They announced this on the floor the next day. Wilkins, however, presented a resolution before the convention stating that the NAACP would, quote, give the most careful consideration to nonviolent resistance as carried out in Montgomery, Alabama, and Tallahassee, Florida, for possible inclusion in our expanding program for civil rights. The crowd erupts because the NAACP, of course, had been devoted primarily to litigation. Evers had been pushing them, though, to get more direct. This is 1956. By 1963, it's all for him. This is not new, is what I'm saying. Conflicts in NAACP strategies. 57, the Regional Council of Negro Leadership has its midwinter conference. And in that conference, they challenged the NAACP by basically saying, what is it that you're going to do? We hear you talking a lot of games, but not really see what you got going. There's no suits or anything. This is at their convention. Evans is there. He pushes the NAACP to become more active. He warned that the influence and persuasion that we, meaning the NAACP, have once had in the state have tended to recede, because many feel that of all the legal action that have taken place in other states, certainly one suit should have been filed here in Mississippi. Further argue that it would be prudent for the NAACP to, quote, bring a suit in the state of Mississippi on registration and voting, transportation or education. We would enhance our cause here greatly. But most people now are interested in some type of positive action, even here in Mississippi, especially in regard to these segregation laws and this new voter amendment. The new voter amendment he's talking about is the Civil Rights Act of 1957, which gets that vote. The NAACP understood Evers' desire for more direct action strategies and its tendency to speak out. This had been noticed back in 1955 when he investigated the Lee murder, in which Rupert Hurley informed the NAACP leaders, quote, that Evers seemed to have too much of the Howard influence, meaning T.R. Furthermore, he has a tendency to speak out in groups saying things that he just shouldn't be saying. So you see the development issues. Evers also put pressure. By 1960, he said, you can't expect me to do the things, to be saying one thing and doing another. He talks to Robert Carter, NAACP counsel. He says, you know I'm going to pay to work with NAACP, and at the same time, I have 2 school-age children who are presently going to private schools, segregated. Now, it's rather difficult for me to reconcile to the general public that the fact that I believe in what I preach, while at the same time practice something to the contrary. To be very candid, I would like to be one of the 3 or 4 plaintiffs to initiate legal action to destroy the segregated system here in Jackson. Either my wife or I are both ready and willing to affix our signature authorizing such action in our behalf. I would like an immediate answer to these questions. Start seeing my position. Be pushing hard. All right? And this becomes the point. The NAACP really at that point did not like its representatives being involved in lawsuits. But he says this is something that I want to do. Eventually he's going to do it. He started also saying, when he goes out, I'm doing this. This may not be connected to the NAACP. I'm doing this as a family. Same time he talks to Dr. Medgar Wiley on the coast. Same time he says, I'm anxious to get something going here in Jackson to the point that I'm willing to risk even life itself. We have procrastinated long enough in the state, and the treatment from the whites is not less and rather increased. My feeling is we ought to receive a beat. Let's receive it because we have done something, not because we have done nothing. Let me hear from you on this right away. It's about 1960. Yes, boy. By 1960, you see this push that Evers is saying, look, we got to do something. What we've been doing is not working. Not as effective as I wanted to. So by 1960, he gets real angry. Which is why he lives in Mississippi. He says, Mississippi represents home. It's a part of the United States, and whether the whites like it or not, I don't plan to live here as a parasite. The things that I don't like, I will try to change. This is an interview in 1958 in Ebony magazine. So by 1950, things really take off. By 1963, look at 1961. 2 Group 9. Decide, look, there's a library down there on State Street. And they said, we can't go. That don't make sense to me. Bradford was there. Bradford said, look, we pay taxes. The library seems like a good skill. Why we can't go in? They went to, the black folks had the library card. Library. They checked it out, found books that they knew Carver didn't have. So once they go to the public library, and they said, well, look, you got to go to the black library. They said, well, we don't have them. So they go to the library, they pull out books, and they sit down and read. We know the story. The police said, well, look here. You can't be in here. Where you go? They said, well, we read. Now think about getting arrested for reading. Think about what that means. There's people getting arrested for a lot of things today. But reading isn't one of them. But arrested for reading at this point. And things break out. You have support from Tulu, but you also have support from Jackson who come in and support as well. Evers is a part of this. This is the thing. He does a lot behind the scenes. But Bradford says that Evers worked with the students on strategies prior to the reading, and more importantly, he had notified members of the press in advance of the event. Look, something won't happen down there at that library, so I need to get on down there. Because remember, he's a good PR person. He understands that the more things are publicized and televised, the more light comes to Mississippi. He then comes out and says, our long-range goal is to make it possible for Negroes to go to the city library without difficulty. This is a part of our campaign to eliminate segregation in Jackson and throughout the state of Mississippi. This is a move toward more direct action tactics and away from complete reliance on the judiciary. This is 61. 62, you have the Capital Street boycott. So in fall of 62, the North Jackson Youth Council initiated this boycott. 2 new students are engaged in this as well. Evers secured bail money for planned picketing demonstration. And what they're asking for is, and we're going to boycott because we want employment opportunities, better treatment for black customers, and eventually press the city officials to enact sweeping change. Evers is a part of this too. Now, this brings me to my other clip when you hear his dedication to these movements. And you'll hear the passion again, you'll see.
Don't shop for anything on Capitol Street. Let's let the merchants down on Capitol Street feel the economic pinch. Let me say this to you. I had one merchant to call me, and he said, I want you to know that I talked to my national office today, and they want me to tell you that we don't need nigger business. These are stores that help to support the White Citizens Council, the council that is dedicated to keeping you and I second-class citizens. Now, finally, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be demonstrating here until freedom comes to Negroes here in Jackson, Mississippi.
And look at the order. There's two not to hearing this. Again, going back to what he had said before. We are going to stay here and do this until things change. And that was in 62. These boycotts are successful. But as we kind of roll down, we see Mayor Alan Thompson. And you don't know anything about him in this special case. Thompson had no love for black people whatsoever. He intended to control this state, this city. He had a white tank. He said, you all gonna boycott? I said, what we gonna do? We're gonna hire more police officers. And it's a whole lot that goes on with that. But he gives a speech on May 13th in which he basically saying, we don't have any problems here in Mississippi. Jack, what are you talking about? He goes on with this big thing. And this is what he tells you. He talks about it. You have 24-hour protection by the police department. Just think of being able to call the police any time of the night and say, come quick. Someone is trying to get in my house. I need some help. I suppose you need the fire department or any other many services that your city provides you. And as most of you know, you're also welcome to present your petitions for improvements in your neighborhood to the commissioners and me. Our offices are always open to you. You live in a city where you can work, where you can make a comfortable living. This is the kicker part. You are treated, no matter what anybody else does, with dignity, courtesy, and respect. What? Well, that thing right there, he's talking directly about NAACP. That's right. Core, all these outside people. He said, you're treated, no matter what anybody else tells you, with dignity, courtesy, and respect. What world is he living in? You know, this, and he talks about Jackson about, you know, it's not like other cities, we don't have all these problems, these crimes, all this thing, this is a lovely place. All right. Evans lived. And on May 20th, he gives a response, a televised response. He was able to give that response because WLBT in these states was in some real hot water with FCC anyway. But by this time, and he really connects the Mississippi movement to the larger movement, but the next clip I've got, the next slide, is I want to show you what he responds directly to this particular point. But Evans says, the mayor spoke of 24-hour police protection. We have. Well, there are questions in the minds of many Negroes whether we have 24 hours of protection or 24 hours of harassment. Mayor Thompson said last Monday, and I quote, you will not find anything here in Jackson that will breed discontent, end quote. I ask you this evening, if you suffer these deprivations, were often called by your first name, or boy, girl, auntie, or uncle, will you be discontented? Yeah. What then does the Negro want? He wants to get rid of racial segregation in Mississippi life because he knows it has been good, not been good for him or the state. He knows that segregation is unconstitutional and illegal. But whether Jackson or the state chooses to change or not, the years of change are upon us. And the racial picture things will never be as they once were. Here in Jackson, we can recognize the situation and make an honest effort to bring fresh ideas and new methods to bear, or we can have what Mayor Thompson called turbulent times. If we choose the latter course, turbulent times will come, not because of so-called agitators or actors of the NAACP, but because the time has come for a change and certain citizens refuse to accept the inevitable. What he says, the change is here, and the turbulence is coming. But it ain't going to be because you kicked out the NAACP. It's not going to be because of these outside agitators. It's going to be because you refuse to accept what's coming. This is powerful stuff people are talking about. Evans is talking about when he said this point. And he connects a lot, too, in terms of what's going on in Africa. And he says that in Africa, you see people who are running locomotives, firing planes, and things of that nature. And in Jackson, if they were here, they couldn't even drive a garbage truck. He says all of this in this speech. And it changed that. You see, on June 1st, 1963, the NAACP is more apt now for the direct act. That's where Wilkins, Medgar Wiley Evers, both are arrested. But in 63, also the NAACP wants to pull back on direct action tactics. They say we need to just pull a stop to it. On terms of protest, lose a lot of support. Evers is torn at that time between them. And he struggles with it. We have the momentum going now. They want to kind of stop the street protests. And so that creates tension. So by 1963, Evans is willing to proceed with direct action strategies despite the NAACP's attempt to slow things down. It's growing desire to important tactics and the system of other civil rights leaders such as King underscored his growing discontent with the procedural constraints of the national NAACP. And toward the end of his life, his wife recalled that Medgar, quote, had all but made up his mind to leave the NAACP and to help start his own organization. And that's important for Evans because he loved the NAACP, because those have been his connections to the outside world at this point. So he's struggling at the end of his life. He would not get the chance After hearing President Kennedy's speech on June 11th, he goes home. But this man, he's laying in the bushes across from his home. Evers gets out. He has T-shirts in his hands and NAACP that says Jim Crow must go. He attempts to walk in the house and he's hit with a rifle bullet, 30-06 caliber in the back. His children and his wife come out the house and they see him in this state. This is 1963, early morning to June 12th, about 12:20 or so in the morning. He died about 1:15 at the local hospital. There's 2 trials. Brown Edwards would not be found guilty of the murder of Medgar Evers until February 1st, 1994. That's a long time, 94, 63, 98.
Over 3 decades.
Yeah. So all like February, I think might be February 50 something, the verdict comes down. He's found guilty. This is the scene after that. This is what Evers leaves behind. His daughter, Rena Evers. His son, Darrell Kenyatta. His wife, Gerda Evers. His brother, Charles Evers. They also have another son, James Charles, who's around 50. And this is the community reaction, June 12th. To bring the community together, the people are supported. Now you've got ministers who are on board now. Oh. Like I said, there being his other son, James Van Dyke, who I got a chance to meet. So this community reaction, June 12th, it brings people together. Many people thought the movement was losing out. Evers' death kind of brings people together, black, white, ministers on board. Gets down to what Evers is about. We all must become advocates of the work that are done. By 1963, Evers wasn't working for anybody. Didn't matter if they was white, black. That had no concern with him. As Malcolm said, toward the end of his life, Malcolm said, I'm willing to work with everybody or against everybody. Makes no difference to me. At the same time, Evers is saying the same thing. He says, it's not enough just to sit here tonight and voice your approval and clap your hands and shake your cheers and sing and then go out and do nothing about this struggle. Freedom has never been free. There's something for everybody to do. His final thing says that what we do today will be subjected to questioning by our children and their children in the years to come. And there's a certain response that you should be able to have. So when they ask you, you said, but let it not be said in the final analysis when history will only record these glorious moments and when your grandchildren will inevitably ask Granddad, what role did you play in helping us make us free men and free women? Did you actively participate in the struggle or was your support only a moral one? Certainly each person here, the man in particular, should be in a position to say, I was active in the struggle from all phases for your unrestricted privileges as an American. That's your answer. For him, that was where he lived his life, and for him, that's what the NAACP was supposed to be about as well. So that when they ask those questions about, look at the conditions we're in, what did you do? When they look back and read your history, what did you do to solve these issues? He said, you better be able to say, I was active in the struggle from all phases, not just that was comfortable to me, but all phases for your unrestricted privileges as an American. That was Medgar Evers, how he lived his life. And in his death, that's what we should take on as that legacy. Looking at the watch, I have 5 minutes. Nailed it.